We are in the last days. We are in the end times. Jesus Christ is coming back soon. Time is short. This is the church's finest hour.
3 days after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, the tremendous lateral blast is unprecedented.
Since the beginning of time, people have been predicting its end.
Y2K bug, Y2K.
The earthquake had buckled.
The tsunami followed one of the largest earthquakes on record.
December 21st, 2012. Maya prediction.
Preparing for the end of the world. About a year left on the planet.
We live in a world which loves the end of the world.
COVID-19.
Case of the U.S. cases of coronavirus more than doubling.
It's spreading
around the globe.
Cicada.
Feels more unstable.
World Trade Center.
In the world.
Good morning, Harvester Christian Church. Welcome. Open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 24, whether you've got it on the app or whether you've got it on your phone or in in-person Bible. I guess that's what we call it, an in-person Bible? I don't know. A paper Bible. We'll call it that. Hey, great to have you all here. Good for you for braving the rain and the torrential downpour today. Great to have you here. Awesome. So we've been in this series called Sign of the Times, and we are talking about Matthew chapter 24, and Jesus answering the question about when will the temple be destroyed and when will be the sign of your coming. And I thought to myself when I was getting ready for this sermon this week, I was like, and I have two very, very specific, strong memories of hearing sermons preached about Jesus coming back. And I want to tell you about those today. I want to start with the first one, obviously. And it happened when I was about 5 years old. And I grew up in a tiny little church in southeast Missouri. It is what you think of as a small country church. It is, white. It had a gravel parking lot. It had a cemetery beside it. It had wooden pews, no air conditioning. The only air conditioning we had was funeral home fans, right? Some of you know what I'm talking about there. And, had the little attendance board up on the side. You could see all sorts of things like that. Love that church. Fantastic church. When I was 5 years old, in fact, this is my very first memory of being in church ever. Now, we had a new preacher who had started at the church, and he was preaching a sermon on the second coming of Jesus. And just preaching this, humdinger of a sermon, right? It was fantastic. He was drawing people in, and as a 5-year-old, I was spellbound. I was hanging on every word as he was describing what it was going to be like when Jesus returned. And he got all the way to the end of the sermon. And as someone who is preaching a sermon on that right now, I understand what he was trying to do, right? He's trying to draw people in. He was ready for this. Just brought everything down. And he closes with this statement. And he says, "Are you ready for Jesus to come back?" Now, as you know, I was paying attention to every word. And I was like, yeah, I'm ready. And no one in the audience said a word. And I thought, well, that's strange. No one's ready for Jesus to come back. So once again, the preacher asked the question. Now, as a 5-year-old, you have to know, I did not understand the concept of a rhetorical question. And he asked the question one more time, and I just shouted at the top of my lungs, "Yes, I'm ready." And in that instant, what had been this well-crafted sermon, he'd worked hard to get it down to getting people to respond. The tension in the room, the positive tension just evaporated because the crowd just lost it. Everyone just started hee-hawing and laughing. And I went from being incredibly excited about Jesus returning as a 5-year-old to realizing the whole church is laughing at me. And I started crying. And I was just bawling and unconsolable. And I don't know who was more embarrassed, me or my mom or the preacher. I don't know who was, but that memory has stuck out to me. And I think that when we talk about the second coming of Jesus, we talk about him coming, it elicits a lot of emotions from people because, some of us are excited about it. I know that other people are just sort of like, yeah, I'm indifferent. I don't know. Some people are fearful of Jesus coming back. Others are confused by it or expectant. I don't know where you're at today. When we talk about the idea of Jesus returning, what kind of emotion, what kind of response does that really sort of generate in your soul? We're going to talk about that today. So as we've been thinking about what we call the Olivet Discourse, right? Matthew chapter 24, it's this multi-chapter section in the book of Matthew. And in that, Jesus had started off talking to his disciples, and they were in Jerusalem, and he'd say, hey, just so you know, the temple is going to be destroyed at some point. And Jesus kind of dropped that on them and then just kept on walking. Well, they go over to the other side of the Kidron Valley up onto the Mount of Olives. And the disciples bring Jesus and they go, hey, Jesus, what did you mean by that? What exactly are you talking about there? And in chapter 24, verse 3, the disciples asked Jesus two specific questions. They asked him these questions. Number one, when will the temple be destroyed? Now, Nicomas has been teaching about this for the last several weeks, and we've walked through the beginning part of the chapter, and he answered that. The second question was, when will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age, right? So the disciples had looked at these two events, and they were like, now, the destruction of the temple, that was a traumatic event. And the temple was the center of their cultural and geographical and political and religious life. And so for them, if the temple was going to be destroyed, that meant that it was going to be the end of the world. They just could not picture a world in which the temple was not standing. So they sort of brought those two events together. And so Jesus answers these two questions, but what he's going to say is that, well, they're actually two separate events. You're asking about two different things. Now, let's review just quickly Jesus' answer to the first question. Remember that first question is, when will these things happen? Meaning, when will the temple be destroyed? You said this is going to happen, Jesus, so when is this going to happen? Now, Jesus gives them some interesting answers, if you recall. On the one hand, he gave them some general ideas, and he said, now look, there's going to be some things that sort of give you the idea that we're moving in that direction. There's going to be political upheaval. There's going to be natural disasters. There's going to be persecution, right? All of these sort of things. And Jesus had said, these are what he called the beginning of the birth pangs. In other words, this is just the beginning of the process. Now, when you see, there'll be false messiahs, all that sort of stuff. Now, when you see these, that's not the end. So don't be misled. Don't think that these things are when the temple is going to be destroyed. But just know that we're leading in that direction. Then he gives a second part of that answer. He said, however, there are going to be some things that you can see. For example, when Rome starts to come and actually encircle the city of Jerusalem, when you see Rome desecrating the temple, when you see them setting up sacrifices in the temple, that's when you know the temple is about to be destroyed. So when that happens, it's time for you to flee. It's time for you to leave Jerusalem and get out of here. So Jesus answers their question, that first question, what's going to be the sign of the signs of the temple being destroyed? And he gives them very, very specific signs. He said, so just so you know, when this happens, it's time to leave. Now, Jesus answers a second question. And he comes back to chapter 24, verse 36. But concerning that day, now that day in the construction of the original Greek, he's saying, I'm answering the second question here. I won't bore you with all that stuff, but he's moving on, right? That's the idea. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. So Jesus says, now you've asked two questions, destruction of the temple, let me give you all the signs that are going to happen. But concerning that day, in other words, when I come back, the second question, when that happens, there are no signs because no one knows when this is going to happen. Jesus actually deliberately refuses to answer their question. Did you see that? He's like, hey, look, I can't tell you, I cannot give you an answer because only the Father knows when this is going to happen. For the destruction of the temple, lots of details, almost a roadmap to show exactly when that's going to happen. But he says, when I come back, I can't tell you. For my final coming, there are no signs that are going to happen. Only the Father knows when that happens. So, let's look at what Jesus says next. Because what Jesus is going to say is like, there's no time. But what he's going to do now is he's going to say, let me give you some examples of what that will look like. And he's going to give us 3 examples as he sort of walks through here. And here's what he says. The first example, he says, for as were the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days, before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. So he says, first of all, let me tell you what that day is going to be like. Since you're asking, I'm not going to give you any signs to tell you when it's going to happen, but I wanted to describe what that day will be like. The first example he uses is Noah. To go all the way back to Genesis, you know the story of Noah, right? God said, hey, I'm going to destroy the earth with a flood. Noah, I want you to build an ark. So Noah builds an ark, and what Jesus says is all the people who were there were completely unaware. It's like they did not know what was going to happen. And so they were caught off guard. And when the floods came, the flood sweeps those people away. So those people who were unaware, who were unprepared, they were swept away in the flood. Now, he gives a second example. Here's the second example. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. Second example, he's just describing domestic life. It's like we've got 2 guys at the mill. What are they doing? They're grinding out their flour. They're getting their daily rations of food. They're just going about their daily business. We've got 2 women, right? They're doing the same thing. They're doing just all the stuff that we have to do every day just to survive. But they're doing these things and they're completely unaware that that day is when Jesus returned. And he says, one of them is taken and one of them is left behind. And he gives a third example. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night that the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and he would have not let his house be broken into. Now, the third example is like, hey, now, if someone was going to rob you, right, and they had told you, say, look, I'm going to come about 3:30 in the morning. And so just so you know, be ready. What would you do? Like if you got a note that said, pay attention, tonight at 3:30 in the morning, I'm going to come and I'm going to rob you. We would be awake, wouldn't we? We would have the police there. We would have all the Ring doorbells going. We would have the lights on. We would have every precaution to scare these thieves away. But Jesus says, no, that's not what the coming of the Son of Man is going to be like. He says, because he's going to come like a thief in the night. Because a thief does not tell you when he's going to come. Now, in every one of these illustrations, in every one of these little stories that he gives, Jesus teaches 2 important truths about his coming. Here's these truths. Number 1 is that those who are taken were consumed with the ordinariness of life with no thought to Jesus' return. That's what we see. As in the days of Noah, what did he say they were doing in the days of Noah? They were marrying. They were giving in marriage. They were planning for the future. They were doing all the things that normally happens. Second example, what are they doing? They're going to the grocery store. They're going to the mill. They're doing all those things that they need. Last example, here's a guy who just is having just a regular night. He's not prepared for what could happen. But those people who were unprepared were consumed with just the ordinary activities of life. But the second truth is this. We go back to that, sorry. Thank you. Those who are unaware were taken to judgment. That's what the second truth is that those who were unaware were swept away in judgment. Just like in the days of Noah, what happened to the people who were unaware? They were swept away by the flood. What happened to the people who were at the mill? The ones who were unprepared were taken away. What happened to the guy who was unprepared for the thief? He was robbed. And look at what Jesus says in verse 44. Therefore, you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour that you do not expect. I have to tell you, there is no more clear statement about the second coming of Jesus than this verse right here. There is nothing more clear, there is nothing less complicated that I could write than the words of Jesus himself. Jesus says, therefore, what? Be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour that you do not expect. It can literally happen at any moment. Now, let's hit pause here for just a second. Because I want to address something that is sort of out there that I think is really important. There is one view of the second coming of Jesus that is taught by some books, and it's this idea that there's going to be this sort of secret catching away of the church, a secret rapture and things like that. It's popularized by the Left Behind books and the movies and things like that. And what that view teaches is that Jesus is going to return secretly. He's going to take the church, and that those who are not Christians will be left behind for this terrible, terrible time that goes on. And then Jesus will return with the church, and everything will be great. There'll be judgment at that point, right? Now, while I respect immensely those who hold that view, I understand that, I have to look at what Jesus says here, and what Jesus says is actually the opposite of that. What Jesus says, in the words of Jesus, those who are snatched away are the ones who are judged. Those people who were taken away. In the days of Noah, who was judged? The ones who were drowned in the flood. Who was judged? Those who were taken at the mill. Who was the one who was judged? The one who was unaware and got robbed at midnight, right? Now, we still believe in the second coming of Jesus. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 teaches us Jesus will visibly return. But it says that it's going to be one event, that there are not two separate events there. And so when Jesus teaches about his return, and I take him as a pretty good authority, he only mentions this one event, that there's not going to be some secret thing that happens. According to Jesus, you want to get left behind because those people who were taken away are the ones who are taken away to judgment. Now, when we look at all of this, when we look at the words of Jesus here, what do we do with this? What do we do with all of these things? Let me give you some practical steps when we think about this. Number one, stop fretting about the signs of the times. What does Jesus tell us we have to look forward to? His return. When the disciples asked him, what will be the sign of your coming? Jesus says there aren't any. There are no signs. In fact, the signs are so few, there aren't any. And what that means is there's no way that you can predict when it's going to happen. Therefore, you must be ready always. So rather than spending time trying to look at this and look at that and figure out all of this sort of stuff, we have to know that there are no signs. Jesus says there are no signs. Just be ready for when I come. Nothing needs to happen. Second Temple doesn't need to be rebuilt. There's no red heifer. There's no Illuminati, one world government conspiracy thing that needs to happen. There's no specific war that needs to happen. Jesus said be ready at any time because you cannot know when the second coming has happened. Now, if you want to know more about what that looks like, come on Wednesday night. We've been having a wild time talking about Revelation on Wednesday nights. Would love to have you. We're about halfway through. We're going to be talking about the beast of Revelation this week. So if you want to know more about that, come back then. But stop fretting about the signs of the times. Rather than fretting about that, rather than spending all this time and energy trying to discern when Jesus will return, we should follow the second thing, which is make sure that you are ready for Jesus' return. We can get so caught up in the ordinary things of life that we become complacent and unaware that Jesus could return today. Now, we all need to do things all the time, right? We need to work, and we need to take care of our family, and we need to do these things. Those things are not bad at all. But what can happen is that we can become so obsessed, so caught up in work or our hobbies or our chores or chasing things that will never last, that we become so oblivious to the fact that Jesus returns that we can become the people who are caught off guard by it. So make sure you are ready. Rather than spending time and energy trying to discern something that Jesus said isn't there, spend that time and energy making sure that you are ready for Jesus to come back. Now, here's the third piece of advice we have. Focus on making your family ready. Make sure that your family is ready. I cannot get past the fact that Jesus says that the people who are going to miss his return are the ones who are the busiest with all of just the ordinary things of life. Marrying and getting married and going to the grocery store and just getting a good night's sleep and all those sort of things. Those are not bad. But I want to tell you, parents, that you can spend a lot of time getting your kids ready for some good stuff. You can spend a lot of time making sure your kids are ready for school and making sure they're ready for ball and making sure they're ready for every activity and college and all of that sort of stuff. And those aren't bad at all. But you can spend so much time getting them ready for things that won't last that you don't spend any time making sure they're ready to meet Jesus. And that's the very point of the parables that he tells us here, is he says that you can become so obsessed and so concerned with the ordinariness of life that you become lulled into complacency. And how horrible would it be to know my kids are ready for this and this and this, but they were never ready to meet Jesus. And so parents, I want to challenge you, if you need to rethink some priorities, if you need to sit down and start cutting some stuff out of your calendar to make sure that your kids are ready to meet Jesus, do it. Take the necessary steps to make sure that your family is ready to meet Jesus. If you need to have some hard conversations, do it. If you need to change some things about the way your family works, do it. Do whatever it takes to make sure your kids are ready to meet Jesus. Now, I told you about the first time that I heard about the coming of Jesus in church. And it ended pretty poorly, honestly. I admit that. And I'm going to tell you about the second time I remember it. It was only about 5 years after the first time. I was about 10 years old. And, my first experience ended so poorly that, I don't know if that I was really all into Jesus at that point. But I had gone to church camp, Gasconade Christian Service Camp. And it was quite a place, to be honest. It was one of the best places I remember as a kid, also one of the scariest places, because it had this old chapel, this old wooden chapel that had to have been built during the days of Noah, probably. And it was just rickety and old, and you sat on it, and it just had wooden slats, and it was raised up off the ground, and you could see snakes underneath it, and it was just a creepy place, man, that thing was. But I loved camp, right? And so I'm there, I'm 10 years old, and all during that week, we've been talking about this idea of you need to be ready to meet Jesus. And honestly, I hadn't thought about it that much. But as the week went on, every night we had this little service called Vesper service. And that was when we came together as like a little church service, right? And on that Thursday night, I remember this just so vividly in my mind. I remember who the preacher was. I remember that he preached out of Luke chapter 16, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. He used an overhead projector for visual aid, and he had this little transparency up there that had a visual representation of that parable, and it had fire coming out of the Gulf and, all sorts of things like that. Just go back and read Luke 16. You'll get why that's important. But I remember at that invitation came down, right? And I just thought to myself, I don't know if I'm ready to meet Jesus. I just don't know. And so they would sing, and as you kind of typically do at church camp, right? It is, we sang a verse and they kind of string it out, you know, and they want you to kind of have an emotional response. And the first verse goes by and I'm just like, no. Second verse goes by and I just thought to myself, I don't know if I'm ready to meet Jesus. And I thought, I need to walk down that aisle and tell him I want to be ready. And at once I was being pushed down that aisle, and at the same time I felt like I was being pulled back. It was like I'm paralyzed. I cannot move. And the song ended, and I didn't walk anywhere. It's like, okay, that's good. Well, of course, there's another verse, right? And that other verse goes, and something broke loose in my soul that I cannot describe. And before I knew it, my feet were walking down the aisle, and then it became a run down the aisle. And the same preacher, I can't really tell a story without crying. The same preacher who was there the first time, who preached that sermon, "Are you ready?" was there to meet me at the end of that aisle. And he said, "I've been praying for you all week." And I said, "I want to be ready to meet Jesus." And he said, "Well, then we have some things we need to talk about." And we talked about those. And we went and called home and got permission from my parents. And that very next night, on that Friday night, Gasconade Christian Service Camp, I was baptized in the camp pool. And I knew at that point that I was ready to say yes to Jesus. And the tears flowed again, but they weren't tears of embarrassment. They were tears of joy and relief. And I want to tell you today, it would be irresponsible of me to tell you that you don't need to be ready to meet Jesus. I followed him every day of my life, and I don't regret a single minute of it. It hasn't been the easiest, but Jesus has been faithful. And the Bible tells us, it says if you want to be ready to meet Jesus, you need to hear the gospel message. You've heard it today. You've heard it. It says you need to believe in him. You need to repent of your sins. You need to confess Jesus as Lord. And then you need to be baptized into him. And baptism is this incredibly powerful experience where you stand before people and say, Jesus is my Lord. And you go into the water and you go under and you come up. And it's a reenactment of the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus. And as the Bible says, we are raised to walk in a newness of life. And that's my question for you is, are you ready to meet Jesus? Are you ready when he comes back? Or are you so concerned with the ordinary things of life that you won't be ready? When you came in, you might have received a card, a baptism card. And if you didn't, that's okay. You can get one on your way out. You can also open up your app, your church app, and you can see the card there as well too. And I want to give you a chance to respond to this today. So here's what this card looks like. I'm going to ask everyone here to respond. And you may think, oh, I don't need to do that. Here's this first option, right? I've already been baptized. And I know that so many of you have made that commitment. And you can say to yourself, I am ready to meet Jesus. Why would I need to fill out a card? I want to tell you something. There is something powerful about just affirming that commitment. It doesn't change anything that you check that card, but it does say, you know what? I am ready to meet Jesus. And that's so special. There's another one that says, I'm considering baptism. And maybe you've been thinking about this for a long time. And you're like, I'm ready to do this. For some of you, you did not walk in here this morning thinking about this, I promise. But you're like, you know what? I need to be ready to meet him. And if you're considering that, just check that box right there. And we would love to get in touch with you and follow up and say, let's walk through that process. What does that mean? Just like the preacher who met me at the end of the aisle, he said, You want to say yes to Jesus, you want to follow him, then we got to talk about some things. We would love to talk about some things with you. And then there's another one. I'm ready to be baptized. On October 13th, we're going to have a baptism Sunday in just a couple weeks. Now, here's a little secret. You don't have to wait until October 13th. If you're ready today, we have everything necessary for you to be baptized today. Whatever it is that is holding you back, trust me, we can take care of it. But if you're like, hey, I want to plan this, right? And I want to invite some people, and I want to make this I just want to make this something really, really incredible, and I want to plan to do it on October 13th. Check that box off, and I promise we'll get in touch with you, and we'll figure out what needs to happen. Now, there's this last box. It says, I'm not ready to be baptized. And whether or not you check that box, it's not going to change anything. But if you do check it, and you put on here, you give us your name, we'll be ready for you when you are. Maybe you need to think about some things. Maybe you need to process some stuff. Maybe you're just like, hey, I'm just too busy. Okay. But I want to tell you, you've heard. You know Jesus is returning. And you know it could be any time. And you know what happens to those who are not prepared. So don't walk out of here today thinking that it doesn't matter to you, because I'm going to tell you it does. It absolutely matters to you. So however you answer this, fill this out and drop it in the box on the way out, and we'll follow up with you, I promise. But in the words of Jesus, here's what he's asking you. Are you ready to meet me when I come back? Let's pray. Father, we come before you right now, and I don't know how to say it any clearer than you did. Father, I don't know any words that are better to say than what you did. You have no idea when you are returning, and we need to be ready. And Father, I know that there are people here who walked in who had no idea this is what we're talking about today, and this is just new and laid on them. But Father, I pray that you would just work on their heart and start a conversation with them, and start something that will take you down that path to being ready to say yes to Jesus. Father, I also know that there are people who have been putting this off for a long time, and they want this service to be over so fast so they can just get up and walk out of here and not have to deal with this. Father, I pray that you would just gnaw on their mind and weigh on their heart and just be heavy on their soul. They are driven to the truth. Father, I know that there are people here that have loved ones who need to make this decision as well. I pray that you be with them, help them pray, help them answer questions. But Father, I pray that none of us will leave here today and not be ready to meet you. In your son's name we pray.